afterwards you get some pizza and you drink, you have to get some wine. You're sitting around, and he'd be like, "We just screwed up. We just picked the wrong guy."
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, William Liu. Today I'm joined by ESPN's Bobby Marks. You're listening to the Hello and Welcome podcast presented by Betway. Today I wanted to bring on Bobby to talk about just how front offices prepare for the NBA draft. Obviously, very busy time of the year for you guys. And of course, just get your thoughts on how the Raptors should approach the offseason. I think that's probably the more boring part. So let's get the Raptors stuff out of the way, and then we'll circle back to how front offices prepare for the NBA draft. So, Bobby, I've circled it down basically to 4 key decisions for the Raptors this offseason. And we'll start with Immanuel Quickley, who is entering restricted free agency. I'm curious because I had a conversation with someone with the Raptors in the front office just leading up to this, just in terms of like how much Immanuel would receive. I was personally a little bit worried that some team was going to jump out with some sort of crazy large offer and really force the Raptors' hand. And I think the person that told me was like, well, we actually have a really good sense of who's interested in Immanuel because he was actually just up for trade. And so, I never know if that's like really a good reason or not, or if the front office people just end up kind of throw you something to throw you off the scent. But what do you think of that notion? And the Raptors should already have a really good idea of who's interested on Quickley and also sort of what the market is on Immanuel.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to what New York's probably going through with OG Anunoby. When you trade for a player and you give up RJ Barrett and Immanuel Quickley, and that player has the potential to become a free agent, and you know what you want to pay him and what the landscape is going to be. I think with Quickley, it's a little bit different because he's a restricted free agent, and you have the ability to match any offer sheet if he does go that direction and sign it. I think the market is a little bit, lukewarm, to say at least, when you look at the teams, right? To go out and get an offer sheet, to have Toronto think about, maybe not matching, which I think they would. There's got to be a market for them. So when you look at there's 5 teams that have cap space, and you look at Oklahoma City, you look at Philadelphia, you look at Detroit, Orlando, and Utah. I mean, is one of those teams willing to put down a 4-year, $170 million offer sheet? I don't see it. I really don't. I mean, I think Philadelphia is going to go in a different direction. I think certainly Oklahoma City, I don't see how that fits. Detroit, I mean, I don't see that there. So I think when you look at it for him, restricted free agency is the toughest thing for a player. It's same as going through the extension period. When you're a rookie extension eligible, if you're not a max player, because you could go one or two ways. You could tell him, go out and get an offer sheet, go out and let the market dictate, or you can come in right off the bat with a fair offer. Now, what's a fair offer? The average point guard salary is around $26-27 million. That's the reality of it.
That sounds like a lot.
Which is not, I think this is what we're going to have to kind of do. Right. We're going to have to condition ourselves, even me, as far as where salaries are going to be going, just because when you have the salary cap likely to increase to $155 million in the first, when Quickley's deal would, year 2 of his deal and stuff like that's, the max that year is like $50 million plus dollars. So if you're getting him at half of what the max could be, whether it be $26-27 million, because it will grow. When Scottie's number comes in, I'm sure we'll talk about that in a minute. Like that's gonna be a whopper, right? That's a whopper of a number here. But as revenue grows, so does the salary cap here. So I do think the Quickley number is going to probably be 25-26 million. I think that's probably realistically kind of what you're looking at for a young starting point guard in this league.
Yeah, you know what? Honestly, I think people will be reasonably okay with that number. I don't think that. I mean, first off, this is all within the constraints of the Raptors budget, and we'll see, if they decide to operate above the cap or if they want to approach it with some cap room. I think it's probably more because that's the one benefit, right? Because Quickley is restricted. You could sort of wait a little bit, I guess, to sign or match whatever offers he's actually signing himself with other teams. And of course, you can, I suppose, renounce Bruce Brown, and there's some options there. But I think more likely the Raptors will probably operate above the cap, as they have done quite many years in a row now. And I think maybe with Quickley, the question is, as you mentioned, you could essentially ask him like, hey, go out there and go get this deal that we should match. But also at the same time, like I suppose the risk is you want to show a player that you're dedicated to him and you want to show him that he's a big part of this program. The Raptors obviously went out specifically targeted Quickley to bring him in to fill a need that they had at point guard. So I don't know. Take us through, I guess, the decision making that a front office can go through with that.
Yeah, I mean, you want to make the player feel good too, right? I mean, yes, you can go to the whole leverage play and use this as a negotiation and say, you know what, go get an offer. It's similar, like last year, um, Kyrie was a unrestricted free agent. He was in Dallas, and everyone was like, well, he has no leverage, right? Then it's basically the Mavericks, and Dallas comes out and offers him three for 120, and everyone freaks out. Like, why would you bet against yourself? Well, eventually you have to make the player feel good also. And it was less than what the max. It's similar to what probably the Clippers will go through with James Harden this offseason, right? Like, who or else but you just traded basically 3 first-round picks, and you need him. You need that player, and he's made $350 million in his career. He could go out and say, you know what, I'll just go play in Phoenix for the minimum. I mean, that's how it works and everything. So you do want him. You want the player to feel good. I don't think you want a situation like what happened with DeAndre Ayton in Phoenix, where Ayton was the last time a player signed a big offer sheet, a whopper, a max type offer sheet, and then Indiana signs him. Phoenix matches, and then it's like there's some he doesn't feel wanted, right? He doesn't feel like basically they did it maybe to use him as a trade asset down the road here. So I do think, if Immanuel Quickley's coming in and asking for 4 for 2045, which Tyrese Maxey's going to get, then go shop, right? Sure. Go shop. But if his agent comes in and says, how about 4 for 120 or 4 or in somewhere in that nature, then I think that kind of gives you a starting point. The beauty of it is that if the NBA Finals ends and if Boston wins, then those negotiations can start as early as midnight on Tuesday. That's kind of a new twist to it all, that you can have an idea of where you are going into the draft. As far as where the Quickley negotiations are going to be, who maybe makes trades, who maybe clears out a little bit more room potentially. Maybe they have a team has them higher on their board and they can't go out and get them, and all of a sudden they make a trade to do so here. But I do think, as you said, that's the big priority, I think, for Toronto to figure out as far as what the cost is. I think, as you said, they probably already have an understanding when you go out and trade for a player like that.
Okay, so I think most likely we know Immanuel's going to re-sign with the Raptors at somewhere within that 25 to 30 a year range. And, I think at least point guard is solved for the future. Bruce Brown, one of the other key 4 decisions for the Raptors this summer. The word optionality was thrown around a lot. I don't know if this is like front office speak. People love, saying optionality.
It's so funny. I've actually started writing. I think I actually used that word in an article I have out today.
No.
I think I used the word optionality. Yes, I do. I think it is front office speak here. Optionality means that we have a lot of options now.
Yes.
Instead of one option, we have multiple options. So that's what optionality is. I love, and I'm friends with Bobby and stuff, and I don't want to pick on Bobby, but I feel like sometimes with front offices, like they want to bring out like the Stanford education and stuff, and and basically, the big word dictionary and stuff. Just tell us what, hey, he's got an expiring contract and he's good for us right now, and we can use him to trade. Yeah. Conclusion. Bobby's not going to say that, but that's what optionality is.
Yeah, exactly. Bruce Brown's optionality. And the long story is you have 4 options, right? You can decline and let him walk, and you get some cap room potentially. Yep. You can decline and also re-sign him potentially. Yep. You can accept the contract, the offer, or the option and trade him, or you can accept the option and you can keep him. Basically, he's got a player option, or he's got a team option for $23 million.
Team option.
And this is not necessarily a novel concept, but I think from the Raptors' perspective, clearly you would need to look at, okay, what's the trade market out there? They've already gone through this. Well, Bruce has already been traded once this year, right? So presumably the Raptors knew sort of what Bruce was being offered in terms of other people being interested in Bruce around the time of the trade deadline. I suppose there was no deal struck then, but realistically, if the Raptors want to walk out of the Bruce Brown situation with some future assets, they would need to pick up his option. It is after the draft too, as well, I believe. So,
Yep.
yeah, I mean, I suppose from the Raptors' perspective, what would I guess retain the best way to use the asset with
Yeah,
Bruce Brown?
I would say the likelihood is that his option will get exercised, meaning that he'll be back on an expiring $23 million contract. I think we get teased a little bit with cap space sometimes. Having been in covering Toronto and been around, like cap space and the Raptors are not like
Yep,
that's not a good dining partner, right? Like I think the last time they had cap space is they signed, was it Damari? Did
it
Damari
was
Carroll?
Damari Carroll.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think you need to be, listen, if you're Philadelphia and you're sitting on $60 million and you have two players on your roster, yeah,
yeah,
that's cap space for you. So I do think, because I think the most you can have is like between like 25 and 30, and that includes like the quickly free agent hold counting there. So who's out there that you want to go out and spend, because you'll pick up the Bruce Brown option. You'll still have your 12-9 non-tax mid-level, and you'll still also have your $4.7 million you used the biannual on McDaniels last year, so
hmm,
you have your 12.9. So I do think at the end of the day, Bruce's team option gets exercised. He's backed. He's a big trade chip. I think a new rule this year also is that you can use your non-tax mid-level to acquire a player in a trade.
hmm,
It's kind of like a trade exception now too, that you can go out and do that. You can't combine them too, but I just think Bruce back gives you just more flexibility compared to, all right, we're going to create cap space and now we're going to have to go overpay a player
right,
in free agency, especially when you have like Detroit sitting there with like $60 million in room. I mean, they got to spend 90% of that by the first day of the regular season. It's like Brewster's Million, right? I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah,
You might be too young for Brewster's Million, but there was a movie called Brewster's Million back in the day
uh-huh.
where then it was $1 million. And they said, Richard Pryor was the actor, and they said, we're going to give you
Yeah,
$1 million. You got to spend it like in 24 hours. But here are all the things you can't do. You can't buy a house, a car. Like there was parameters. And if you did, we'll give you $20 million back and
yeah.
everything like that. So for Detroit and Utah and OKC and Orlando, Philly, you got to spend 90% by the first day of the regular season. So then you get lumped in with those teams, right?
Hmm.
Like as far as going out there, I think it just makes more sense as far as to pick up the option and then figure out as far as what you don't have to do anything right off the bat, but there might be a deal come July 1st that it makes sense as far as that maybe Toronto could pick up another expiring contract and maybe a draft pick that comes with it.
It's been a running joke on this show that Bruce Brown is not interesting enough to have his own trade saga. But at the same time, it's one of those things that's like unresolved, right? Because you know that it's not necessarily a piece that fits with the Raptors right now. Clearly, he's a guy who can contribute. Other teams would want. Let's just get this thing done. But of course, that would require the right deal to come along. And yeah, that's about as much time I wanted to devote to Bruce Brown. Gary Trent Jr. The funny thing with
Yeah.
Gary, so he's unrestricted this summer.
Yes.
And, the Raptors have obviously drafted Grady Dick. And
Yep.
ideally, you would like to see Grady slide into the starting lineup as your shooting guard. Right now, though, Grady is still maybe like at least a year away. I mean, he showed some really good flashes, but again, the Raptors were tanking towards the end of the year, so it's hard to fully buy into that. Gary's a guy I look at almost as a candidate to become another Bruce Brown.
Yep.
And I know this is not something people want to hear about, but
No, listen,
I'd be
you're going down the right direction. Listen,
Yeah,
I'm not ready to put my kid's mortgage or my kid's college tuition on the line here. I wouldn't be
yeah.
surprised that we get to June 30th or June 29th, and Gary Trent Jr. has signed an extension in Toronto.
Mm,
Like I wouldn't be there. We've seen it before. Harrison Barnes did it a year ago. Naz Reid did it in Toronto before free agency started. Listen, if they came and offered, I don't know, maybe a 1-year extension at 17 million,
yeah.
it probably makes sense, right? And now he replaces the Bruce Brown as far
Well,
as your big. Now you have two big trade chips and stuff, and it gives him an
uh-huh.
extra $17 million. So I wouldn't be. So that's we're going back to optionality. That's
Hmm.
optionality, right? Now you have two expiring contracts that you can go out and use if you need to.
Well, see, Bobby, I was such a sicko. I was thinking you give him basically the same deal as Bruce Brown got. You give him the 1-year big bump, maybe
Yep.
like let's say 20, let's just say, I don't know, and then you give him the player option or the team option for the second one, and all of a sudden you exactly recreated it, right?
And I think you would rather do that in an extension, because if you do it as a free agent, then if you do a 2-year deal and it's a player team option, then he's got the one a bird restriction where basically his veto power on a trade. He could certainly avoid that if he wanted to. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility, less flexibility there. But I do think it makes probably a little more sense as far as, because we haven't heard a lot about Gary at all.
No.
We wrote, I put out an article on ESPN on Sunday, and we basically did the tiers. We do it every year, 6 tiers of free agency here. Toronto's we call them a tier 2 team, right? It's cap space at a cost. Those are the teams there. Yep. As far as you want to create cap space, but you're just going to cost you Bruce Brown. And then what we do is we put free agents out there, and there's not that many of those cap space free agents, right? There's like and Gary kind of is he a cap space free agent? Is he a non-tax mid-level guy? Where does he fit there?
Yeah.
He's kind of he's like almost like kind of where Buddy Hield might be, perhaps.
Sure. Similar type of players.
Yeah. Not, I think Malik Monk is in a little bit higher, higher, probably a little more in demand. But I do think entertaining extension or a new contract with Gary would probably make sense here.
Yeah, as you mentioned, it is kind of that in-between space, right? Because he's making, I believe, 18 this year. He picked up his option. And it's just the Raptors have never fully been married to him, but they just kind of keep this thing rolling. It's it's a situationship almost, in a way, between the Raptors and Gary Trent Jr. So that's decision number 3. What do you do with him? I actually really like the idea of potentially re-signing him and giving you some more options. And again, just like another contract that you can potentially trade, or also a guy who's pretty productive when you do play him. He's a very good 3-point shooter. And then the fourth key decision for the Raptors this offseason is just, do you extend Scottie Barnes and sign him to this rookie scale extension this summer, or at least before the start of next season? I mean, let's be honest. The Raptors have retooled the entire thing and pivoted towards Scottie. It'd be weird if they did not extend him. Of course, there are arguments to be made, like Tyrese Maxey, for example. They let him wait till this summer, and that's part of the reason why Philadelphia has such a big opportunity here in free agency, because they've sort of not even manipulated the cap, but just played it smartly. At the same time, I don't see the same situation with the Raptors potentially being there, and I think as much as possible, you want to be able to show Scottie, we're committed to you. We've rebuilt the team around you. We have huge expectations for you. And here's the money to show what that feeling is from us. So take us through, I guess, the decision-making around Scottie this summer.
Very different than Tyrese Maxey. Tyrese Maxey was able to wait, or they basically reached an agreement because he was a late first-round pick. His cap hold as a free agent was really low. Like $13 million here.
Right.
So they basically said, hold on, let's go out and use cap space first. I'm just pulling up their Toronto. Scottie's different because he's a top 5 pick, right? So, you go in that. So Scottie's cap hold next year is $30.3 million.
Oh, okay.
So his max is going to be like 30, I don't know, 38, 39, right?
Yeah,
so you're not losing much here. You're losing like $8-9 million here. I would be stunned if within the first week of free agency that there is no deal done with Scottie Barnes. 5 years, I think it's 225. I want to say 225, 226, probably can increase if he makes all NBA. As my good friend Brian Windhorst calls it, the fun max. That is the max where there's no, it's an upside. It's buying stock. LaMelo Ball got a max contract. Darius Garland got a max contract. We might see Cade Cunningham get a max contract. Evan Mobley here. So I would expect that it's a bet on the player, but I think there's more body of work for Scottie than probably some of these other players that we've seen in the past here, in the past before. So I would expect him to get that the full amount. If he didn't, I would be really surprised.
I think we would all be really surprised. And again, this one is probably the most, the easiest one between the 4. I mean, it's not particularly difficult summer for the Raptors. I think they got the difficult parts done in season with OG getting dealt and Pascal getting dealt. And so, Fred walking in free agency the summer before that. Those were the more difficult points. This summer, I think, is actually fairly straightforward. You have 4 decisions to make, but pretty clearly the Raptors should resign. Or not resign, but extend Scottie and resign Immanuel. Before we go to break, I'd actually talk about the draft too, because I really want to know about just what the front offices do in preparation for the draft. I wanted to. It was funny because I was pulling up your free agency breakdown for the Raptors in terms of the team needs, and you had listed 6 team needs: 3-point shooting, point guard depth, bench scoring on the wings, backup big, quickly signed to a reasonable deal. an off-ball offensive development from Scottie. Ideally, you want him to see him shoot better. I think we've already talked about Quickley. Obviously, everyone wants to see Barnes shoot better. But out of those four team needs, three-point shooting, point guard depth, bench scoring on the wings, and backup big, if you had to prioritize one for the Raptors this offseason, which one would you go?
I would say probably backup big.
Okay.
Certainly I know you've got Pirtle signed. I do think there's, to kind of strengthen that front court. I think you could always add shooting off your bench. I know you have, depends on what happens with Trent, and, certainly you have Grady Dick there. I think perimeter shooting matters. I think you are, as I said, probably a little thin, and you signed Quickley. You probably are a little bit thin at backup point guard here. I mean, I guess it's facilitator. We call it. It's the new language as far as point guard.
It's optionality of point
guards. So yeah, I mean, I think you can account, and we'll, as you said, we'll talk about this in a minute in the draft. I think where you are at 19 and 32, right? 1932,
31.
1931, that you can get two players there. Certainly, I think there's, it's an interesting mix of players here. But I think probably addressing your big is probably your priority going into free agency.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Raptors do have Kelly Olynyk, which, I think he's offensively very good for a big, but obviously defensively, if you play him at center, you're basically just throwing away the concept of getting stops defensively. And so he's probably ideally your power forward. Let's say, like, for example, Utah played him in a lot of multi-big lineups, but he's not the only big out there. And yeah, backup big would be really nice. And, yeah, I mean, you know what? It's possible that they address that through the draft as well. But we're going to take a quick break right here. We're with Bobby Marks on the Hello and Welcome podcast presented by Betway. And when we come back, we'll talk about the NBA draft. Welcome back to the Hello and Welcome podcast. I'm your host, William Liu. I'm here with Bobby Marks. I just want to remind you to please continue to rate, review, subscribe to the podcast. Please keep commenting, liking, subscribing to the channel on YouTube. And follow us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Hello Welcome Pod. Okay, back to Bobby Marks. And we'll touch on really quickly the Raptors in the draft. So they got 19 and 31. How much excitement do you think, now that they've changed the draft into a 2-day process and put the second round on a separate day at 4 p.m., how do you think that would change your process as a front office? Because the Raptors do technically hold, I suppose, the first overall pick of the second round.
Yeah.
How do you think that changes things tangibly?
Yeah, I just think it gives you, more flexibility. It's like, we've had the draft on a 1 day forever, and it basically the first round bleeds into the second, right? It's like rapid fire. You go to get a soda out of your fridge, and already Toronto's picked at 31, right? Like, what just happened? Like, I just think it's like, what happens is that we will have the first round on that Wednesday, and then we'll be done. And now, okay, the clock restarts. The clock restarts until Thursday at 4 o'clock. That what teams can go back, reassess what they've done. As I said, you're in the process of negotiating with your own free agents, extensions, figuring out what your team's needs are, who's left on the board is going. There might be a guy that teams ranked in the teens that all of a sudden is still staring at you at 31. And now all of a sudden, instead of like everything is mass chaos, which I call the draft is like mass chaos, It's like, okay, we're going to meet as a group after the draft. We'll meet in the morning. We'll meet in the afternoon. And what can we do to get 31 from Toronto? Or if you're Toronto, you're thinking, you know what, we're in great shape. Yeah. Right. We're going to get somebody that can really, really help us. And I think it gives you like just a clear mind. I just from a TV standpoint, because I've been doing draft coverage, I think this will be my 7th year with ESPN. You get to the second round and you're on like pick 40 and you're like, oh my God, I got another hour and a half. Like, and I don't think it's probably unfair to the players out there. And I just think it just makes it a little more, I think it makes it a little bit more, I think it's the process is going to be a lot better. Now, do I wish it would have been at 8 o'clock on Thursday night? Probably. I think a lot of us would, but there's a presidential debate going on in the United States for that. That's why it's at 4 o'clock here. But I do think it adds another layer of intrigue as far as that, you get two days worth of, certainly draft content and, team content.
No, it'll be great. I will be there at 4 p.m. watching for Mark Tatum on ESPN announcing It's like the Raptors got the first overall pick, but
That's right. Yeah, that makes up for the San Antonio pick.
Yeah, totally. I'm sure it's all even now. Yeah. Okay. You know what? It's interesting because I've always wondered what front offices go through
Yeah.
on draft day. And you already mentioned earlier
Oh,
that
it's chaos.
it's just a
It's
zoo.
chaos.
Because
It's like working on a wall. I've never worked out Wall Street before.
uh-huh.
Like, I'll give you a funny story before we get in here. So
All right.
what we would do in New Jersey and Brooklyn, and I think teams still do this, is we would put dollar signs next to, you set up your board. Okay, so you have your big board. This year it's 58 picks. You would set up your big board, and usually it's the weekend before. So you've gone through the process, right? You've done all the scouting, you've done all your visits, you've done your background, your intel, your medical. You've done players have visited, you've gone to pre-draft, all these other things. So now you get to the weekend, right? The weekend before the draft, you have everybody in your scouts in a room, and then you start putting your big board together, right? Like your top 58 best available. Now it's a little bit different. Like Toronto, if you're at 19 and 31, like you're going to massage the board a little bit. You're not going to probably take two players at the same position. Even,
Okay.
I mean, you maybe not.
Yeah.
So you go through that and you set your board, and that's really kind of what dictates as far as how you go about drafting. So if there's somebody at, let's say you're at 19 and you see someone that you have really high. Let's say you had him fourth on your board, and all of a sudden you get to pick 12. That guy is still there. Now it's like, okay, do we call a team and say, you know what, we're going to give you the Indiana first in 26 to move up seven? Just like that rationale thinking there. But a lot of the times you just kind of go off your board, but it becomes chaos. I laugh. This is the story. So we would put dollar signs next to the numbers. So if you're at 35 and you have $3 signs, yeah, we're going to spend. We want to buy that, right? And so I'll spend 3.5 million. Right. So it gives you just a gauge as far as how much we had one year. I don't even know what year this was. We bought 3 picks later in the second. We bought Xavier Thames, Corey Jefferson. I'm not sure who the third guy is. And I said to our director of player personnel, Greg Polinsky, after we had done it, I looked at him. I said, do we have enough roster spots for these guys? Okay. So it is like it's like Wall Street, right? Like you're just like you're on blah blah blah. So I do think that's where it probably becomes less chaotic for day 2, because day 1 is not bleeding into there. But listen, it's one of the great. I mean, especially when you're in it, it's one of the great nights of the year because you can find guys that can come impact at really low, inexpensive contracts, right? Like Gigi Jackson's a great example who gets drafted by Memphis in the second round and comes out, and I know the circumstances with the Grizzlies because of injuries this year, comes out and makes second team all rookie. So you can find guys like that can come in, and especially if you want to spend money down the road and you're on these 4-year the likelihood is if you get it right, you're going to have guys for 8 years at least. Yeah. So that's the beauty of the draft and everything.
Yeah, no, I'm the chaos inside that room, I've always been curious, right? Because like the media is just right outside. I mean, like for the Raptors, like we go to the practice facility, we're sitting like 2 doors down basically from where the front office is. I'm assuming a million phone calls are ringing. 5 minutes between picks. It feels long as media because they're like, oh man, can Woj just tweet it out already? Just let us know. But it's like, no, actually, I can just imagine the fury and the chaos in those rooms. I was wondering in terms of like the emotions heading into that day too, right? Because I mean, you've done enough of these in your lifetime.
Thank God. But, emotions, you buyer's remorse. I worked for Rod Thorne for 10 years. One of the great GMs, the man who drafted Michael Jordan. Yep. And Rod was the best because he would always have buyer's remorse after the end. Like we picked Derek Favors in 2010 at 3, and we afterwards you get some pizza and you drink, you get some wine. You're sitting around and he'd be like, "We just screwed up. We just picked the wrong guy." And so we get used to that, right? Kenyon Martin, we picked in 2000. 2000, we had the number one pick.
Number one pick,
and Rod was like intrigued with Darius Miles.
Okay.
Darius Miles, Stromile Swift, Mike Miller. Those were kind of like the top guys. And Rod was because rest in peace, Jerry West really liked Darius Miles, and Rod and Jerry were really close. And Jerry was pushing Darius, and and we draft the Kenyon, and that Rod is like, "What did we do? We just drafted. We drafted him." I was like, "The guy hasn't even played yet. Like, can we just
Yeah.
get the summer league? Let these guys." But yeah, that's you get that little of that buyer because it's like going shopping. You want
Yeah.
three of everything. You only
Hmm.
get one, so that's where you trust your scouts, you trust your intel. I think the intel part is important. I think the interview part is really important because that guy is going to integrate with your locker room. He's going to integrate
Right.
with your coaches. Um, and it's basically you're taking everything that you've put together for however long they've been in, whether it be the juniors or in high school or in college, and it comes down to one night, and it's like an information gathering where
Mm.
you're basically those are basically spitting out where you project that player to be.
Yeah, well, you know what? I hear this word intel thrown around a lot, and it makes the NBA almost feel like, in a way, like the FBI. Like there's like a dossier on every teenager out there who has dribbled a basketball. Like, to what extent? Like, first off, where does this, like, who does the actual like intel sourcing, and
Yeah.
also, like, to what extent do, like, what kind of details are on these like files?
Well, it depends. Like, do you really want to go like the private eye intel route, or do you want to go, basically it's your scouts and it's your player personnel, basically, whether it be calling their strength and conditioning coach,
Mm.
their trainer, their manager, and just basically building up a catalog. We went full intel. Like we had a private eye.
Oh
He
wow.
would put together these. I mean, when I first started with the Nets in '95.
Uh,
I was like reading these and I was like, oh my God. Like, I think Gary Trent, the father, was the first player.
uh-huh.
I read his scouting, his
Oh, I need to
background.
hear that one.
I was like, oh my God, like this is how it is. And it would be like everything as far as speeding tickets to
Okay.
arrest or,
Uh-huh.
and it would be like a book of like basically
Yeah.
just your intel book.
Wow.
But I do think you get a feel for when you're meeting with that player, when your team psychologist
Sure.
is meeting with that player, kind of who he was, because Royce, who's a kid that I want to say O'Neal. It's not O'Neal. Royce, the kid from Iowa
Oh yeah,
State
he
that
didn't want to
had,
fly on planes.
yeah, like his
Yeah,
interview was
right.
great. Like I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
this kid's
Royce
terrific.
White.
And our team, yeah, Royce White and our team psychologist was like Bobby, like he just fooled you, so you have to
Hmm.
be like, you just have to take it all into account here. But yeah, I mean the intel, the background is the front offices have expanded now where you have so many scouts and personnel people where you're getting as much as you can. You're calling college coaches. Some intel's better than others.
Hmm. Sure.
Some people you trust more than others.
No, this is I mean, this is like the world's like most difficult job interview, basically. Like, this is kind
The
of
draft,
FBI
the
esque.
draft is one of the hardest things to do. To pick a player is
Yeah.
really hard. And I think, like, I know if you were Toronto, you were like, oh man, I wish we were at 8 or whatever,
Yeah.
or wish we were, but like, this year's draft, the separation,
Hmm.
like especially at 19 and 31, like there's not much of a difference between 19 and 31. You're going to
Mm.
get there's such a wide range here as far as where players are going to be, and it's a matter of like I always tell draft prospects, like, it doesn't matter where you're picked because once the draft's over, you're one of
Yes.
58 players who got picked. I don't care if you got picked at 1 or picked at 20. You start the same journey as everyone else. You start your summer league, your training, how you fit in.
Hmm.
Sometimes it might make more sense you getting to Toronto because you're
Yeah.
that big they were looking for. That Zach Edey, for example, slides to 19 and he's going to be pissed off because he thinks he should be picked in a lottery. Well, maybe at the end of the day, it may work out best for him.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's where I was curious about the draft, like the in-person portion, because you could do all the, private eye investigating
Yeah.
and, files on a guy and call the coaches, but there's obviously such a big importance put on meeting with the player, seeing what the workout looks like. And I was looking through the Raptors, like just who they had worked out over the last few years and then who they ultimately picked. And it's like
Yeah.
Grady, they'd worked out.
Yep.
Scottie they brought in for a workout. Pascal they secretly worked him out in Buffalo because they couldn't get his visa to come across the border to Canada back in 2016. Jakob they worked out. Like these guys, they've typically, if you go through the Raptors like workout list, they've actually stuck pretty closely to that. They haven't like completely brought in a stranger. So I was thinking about like what goes into that draft workout when you bring in a guy that you really, really are
Yeah.
intrigued in and it's in your range. What goes into that from the front office perspective?
I think what goes into it, because it's 3-on-3 and you're not playing 3-on-3 in an NBA game,
Okay.
right? So you got to be like a little bit cautious there.
Yeah.
I think the draft workout's more for your coaches.
Okay.
As far as them being on the court to work with them and basically kind of put some terminology out there and see how they can kind of work with
Okay.
it here. 3-on-3 workouts is the hardest thing to go through. 1-on-0 workouts are hard because you don't have anyone else to tap in. Like
Yeah.
it is hard. So I wouldn't listen, I saw Kobe work out 3-on-3 and it was the best workout I've ever seen in my life. Right. So yeah, I mean, that translates into thing. I saw Tracy McGrady the following year work out 1-on-0 and Tracy was coming off a hamstring and was okay. Tracy still had a Hall of Fame career.
Yeah.
So I do think I don't think you can't get caught up in a guy coming in 3-on-3 and blowing the doors off because it's unfair to your scouts who's in Lawrence, Kansas on a Wednesday night seeing Kansas State, and they're busting their butt, going city to city to see these guys. And you all of a sudden be like, man, that guy shot 20 or 25 in his 3-on-3 workout. And the guy's like, well, I just saw him shoot 2 for 19 versus Missouri.
Yeah. What do you got me out here for?
I think the hardest thing is in the draft evaluation process is when a player doesn't come in and visit, though. I think and you haven't met him in Chicago, and you don't have, but you still have him high on your board. And nowadays, you'll have the medical, I think, for that because everybody's mandated to go. I think that's kind of like your gut feeling there because we had 1 year we picked Marcus Williams and Josh Boone, the two guys from UConn, and we had them really high on our board, and we had picked 23 and 27. And they didn't come in for a workout, and we picked them because they slid, and there was a reason why they slid, right? It just and they did not pan out as what we thought it would be. So I think that becomes a little bit more challenging is if you're staring at Rob Dillingham at 19, for example, and he slides, or Ron Holland, guys that maybe had thought they were going to go in the lottery, and now you're at 19 and you have not worked them out, then it's like, okay, if you're a Messiah, you're Bobby. Now you're like, okay, where's my scouts? Where's my guys that have seen them, up close and personal? And why has he slid to 19?
Yeah, that's basically what happened with Cam Whitmore last year, right? Because I know for the Raptors,
yes,
there was a lot of discussion.
He didn't interview great. He didn't interview great. He was. I mean, and one of the things what I love doing is
what does that even mean, by the way, when he doesn't interview great?
I think it's bullshit, honestly. Because here's the thing: I've worked with draft prospects for the last. Jason Tatum was my first client, and what I'll do is I'll work with them and help them prepare for their interviews.
Okay.
So it's basically just put them through an hour at interview and getting them comfortable. Cam Whitmore was fine. Yeah, a little arrogant and stuff, but he was fine. There was no red flags and stuff. There are certainly some guys that would red flag you and stuff like that. So yeah, that was the knock on him, and that he didn't interview well, and that's a big reason why he slid all the way to Toronto. And when Houston got a good player at where they are at 20,
Well, that's what I was saying. Is just like I know that online at least there was a lot of discussion like, oh my God, he's sliding. Like the Raptors are 13. Like you can be potentially there to get somebody who was even considered as high as 4, for example. But ironically enough, Houston actually got both their top options there, I suppose. I'm so happy you're talking about the interview process because you hear players sometimes talk about teams asking them the strangest questions during these draft workouts.
How many you're in a room, how many tennis balls can fit in there? Like, why would you ask that? Like, what does that come out to? I started mixing in. I don't know. I've started mixing in some fun questions when I'm preparing these guys. Like, if you were a superhero, who would you be?
Okay.
Just get you thinking a little bit. Well, why would you be Superman?
Right. But these are 19-years-olds who are super nervous, and they're like, "Oh my God, if I say Spider-Man, I'm going to be
why?
I'm not going to get drafted."
What's the hardest? The hardest question is that stumps draft prospects is you have the ability to play 3-on-3. Winner stays. You get to pick two teammates that are not in the NBA. So that stumps them, and then I say you can pick 2 NBA players, and that really stumps them, right? Like because what that does, it makes you think, right? Like, okay, I'm putting a team together.
Right.
What team can, and that tests your basketball knowledge as far as with that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you remember like the oddest question you asked a guy, or like prepared a guy to answer for, you know, because I saw some of the questions on this list were like, you know, very imaginative, as you mentioned. I saw one player say that he was asked by the front office, "Do you practice safe sex?" Which I was like, okay, that's, you know what, that's actually a useful question.
Your HR department might be coming down, banging on the door on that one. I don't know if that would have flown passed the mustard test. I just think it's scripted based on the player. Really,
Okay.
I think every player is different. I think there are some that I think you want to know what players like to do when they're not playing basketball. I think that's the biggest thing. Like when you're not playing, what do you like to do? And it just can't be like playing video games, right? Like I don't want to just hear you say, "Oh, I like to play video games." What else do you like to do? Like when you want to get away from basketball, what do you like? Yeah, I like to go fishing. I like to go roller skating. I had some player tell me I like to go roller. I was like, wow, that's like a Back to Future type moment there. You know, like Reed Shepherd was terrific. Like we talked, and he's like, yeah, my parents didn't allow me to play video games growing up. They wanted me to go be on the baseball team and ride my bike to my friend's house. Like it was like back in the 80s, right? Like you had to do that. Your mom said, be home at 6. Okay. You know, like that's how like things work and stuff. So I do think it's like you just have to show your personality. And I think teams want to know if Steph Curry is going to have dinner with the team after a game. Are you coming, or are you going to want to go back to your hotel room and just watch TV? Right? Like you just have to like just kind of like get in that mindset of that player.
All right, and then last question on this, because this is actually really, really insightful. I'm so happy we got to talk about this rather than like who should the Raptors take at 19, which we already had that conversation as well. That was fun, but I also like to know like the process that goes into this. Yeah, how much do you know? Like, how much can you tell if a player's bullshitting you? Because it definitely seems like there's probably two-way bullshit, not just one way.
Well, it's scripted. You're a robot, right? You're telling the player's telling you what you want to hear. Like, come on, you know, like we had a player. I'm not going to say the name, but we had his background, and he lied to us in the interview, right? Like it was like, come on, that's the biggest thing. I tell players, just tell the truth, man,
right?
Because they're going to find out. Like, don't bullshit. Like we had intel that a player refused to check into a game, and it was true. It wasn't bad intel. And we asked him, like, oh, no, that never happened. They're like, oh, okay, you know. Right. So I think you just can't be a robot. You can't be scripted in the process. You know, you don't want to be like, I don't want to hear all the right answers, right? Like I want to hear like, you know, kind of
my biggest weakness is I work too hard sometimes.
Well, that kind of shit. You know, like the one thing is like, I asked the player, you know, who do you like to watch? And like, you know, a lot of like guards, Damian Lillard. And then I ask you like, who do you play like? Damian Lillard. Whoa, okay. Well, you play like Damian Lillard? Yeah, no, I am Damian Lillard. I'm like, wait a minute. Like, like not yet. Okay. So yeah, I think the big thing too is how much the G League has taken off. Is if we draft you, or you're going to go play and we assign you to our G League team, would you go? Mm-hmm. What's your thoughts? What do you know? What do you know about the G League? Would you? And I always, you know, I think players are smarter than they were 10 years ago. I've had some players tell me like they wouldn't go, and I'd be like, okay, you're not going to get drafted, so good luck to you. Mm-hmm. So I would say just like embrace it, like embrace the process. As far as me, you know, it's only for you to get better. I mean, you know, with Toronto's G League team, you know, that everyone goes, unless you're like Victor and like, you know, some of the top guys. Yeah. Everybody at one point is going to go play for your G League team.
No, it's okay. The Spurs sent the G League to Victor. It's like, it's actually
that's true. He didn't have to travel to Austin.
Yeah. All right. Well, Bobby, this is really fascinating. I love. I mean, your perspective is so unique because you've worked so long in front offices. You're just casually telling stories that, I saw Kobe work out 3-on-3. I'm like, okay, that's
added to this day. You know, it's
like a highlight of my life.
Well, and it's funny because then, you know, the rules have changed. Where then it was you could allow your own players to work out with draft prospects.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So if you had 3 years less of experience, they didn't have to, but it was allowed to. So he was all out. He worked out with Ed O'Bannon and Khalid Reeves. God, man, he was so good. I mean, like so good. Like you could just tell. like
What pick
effortlessly.
did you guys have? Oh, that was a Kerry Kittles
We
pick,
had
right?
seven, I think seven. We took Kerry. Thank God he fell to 13 because I would have felt this at the end of the day. And I said this when Jerry West had passed away last week, and
Mm-hmm.
people got offended when I said this. I was like, my memory of Jerry West is June of 1995 because June of 1996, Kobe's draft is because we were lined up to draft Kobe. We had brought him in so many times. We had hired John Calipari, who was a 34-year-old coming from UMass. And then the night before, they met with our front office. Kobe, I don't think Kobe did, but his parents and Arn Tellem.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, Jerry was like in the behind the curtain, basically pulling the strings, basically threatening, "Hey, you draft my son, I'm going to go play in Europe next year." Right. And then you get
Oh wow, yeah,
you get to the point where like, can we afford to do this? Kerry's really good, but it wasn't just us. Like he fell to 13, and everything. And then Charlotte goes out and trades for Vlade Divac and everything like that. And the rest is history here. So yeah, I mean, it's, as I said, like the draft process, it's like, there's no perfect recipe for it, right? It's like you've got to trust your scout, and you got to trust all the intel that you've been able to, and how that player fits in with your team.
Yeah, no, this is endlessly fascinating. It really is, because it's the closest you will get to the NBA being like an FBI operative. But Bobby Marks of ESPN, thank you so much for your time. We ran long, but this was a really
it was good, discussion. Fun. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So thanks everyone for listening. Please continue to rate, review, subscribe to the Hello and Welcome podcast presented by Betway, and we'll be back later this week.